Hello, I'm Jake Boudrot, Civic Journalist at Tello Community Television. Joining me today is the Executive Director of the Nova Scotia Seafood Alliance. Welcome back, Kris Vascotto.
Thank you, Jake. It's good to be here.
So recently, Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture Kent Smith said a new provincial compliance unit will target illegal seafood-related activities that are negatively impacting the sustainability of resources and the safety of communities. It's clear how catching seafood out of season and without a quota can affect the resource, but how has this impacted the safety of communities?
Well, there's a couple of things that you have to keep in mind here. So you have two kind of streams of wild fish and seafood that enter the value chain. Those that enter through what I call the legal stream, which enter within the confines of the law. It's all reported, it's written down from the harvest all the way into the value chain, and it moves on up. And that essentially, even from a simple food safety standpoint, if we run into problems with the quality of that item and it's a consumer down in, let's say, somewhere in downstream in the European Union who has a problem, we can then trace that all the way back to the point of entry of that product into the value chain itself. Once you start getting into these pieces associated with unreported sales, or where it's an unauthorized entry of fish and seafood in the value chain, it could be from out of season sales, it could be from a harvester who decides they would prefer to get paid out of the books and not have those transactions recorded, then we're unable to trace that product back to where it came from. So that's a massive food safety issue. At the same time, what happens in many of these interactions is that when wild fish and seafood is purchased as an unreported sale, it'll actually get purchased for a lower value than something that enters into the legal stream, so to speak. That creates a very uneven and unlevel playing field for operators. So it means if somebody who's operating within the boundaries of the law, they have a certain price point that they can enter the market with based upon the price that they paid down at the wharf. Once we start seeing sales that are coming in through these other streams, so to speak, at a reduced value, that gives those actors that are not abiding by the law a competitive advantage against those that are actually obeying the laws of the land. And that's really problematic because it starts to breed a system which can get worse and worse and worse. So it's important to put those checkpoints in. And then, of course, we've all heard about what's been going on in some areas of Nova Scotia associated with that type of competition to buy. And again, these types of pieces can get greatly reduced. These pressures can come off if everybody is operating by the same set of rules and the same set of reporting in the value chain.
So what you're saying is this is a public health issue because some of this food is uninspected and unregulated, and people really don't know what they're getting when they're buying.
That's one of the key risks associated with all this. I mean, it's not just a public health issue, it's also about the very science of the stock. You can imagine that the way that we manage a fishery is we say, oh, we have this much of it out there, and that means we can take this small portion and the fishery is going to be sustainable. As you start to bring in large amounts of volumes of unreported sales, that means it's never written down. So the science can never reflect on how much of that material was taken out, which imperils the very sustainability of the fishery, which then has knockoff effects. It means that we might lose our Marine Stewardship Council certificate for sustainability, which impacts whether we can access certain premium markets. At the same time, there's a reputational risk. Consumers that are willing to put our products on their plates around the world and pay a very healthy dollar for doing so, do so with the confidence of the Canadian fisheries management system. What that means is that when they buy a piece of wild-caught seafood, they know that it was harvested sustainably, they know it was harvested safely, and they know that there's a certain social license attached to that. There's a great reputational risk as we see these types of activities because it means the consumer on the other end, who again might be somewhere in the Indo-Pacific Rim, could be somewhere in the European Union, could be somewhere in the southeastern US, that just says, you know what, I'm actually a little bit nervous. I do not want my dollars to be supporting illegal activities, so I'm going to turn somewhere else. It might be an aquaculture product. Given the way that prices are going, it could even be a steak.
As the regulator of the shore-based fish buying and processing sector, the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture said inspectors will focus on wharves and seafood facilities where illegal activities occur. So is this where most of the activity occurs, or is this a matter of jurisdiction where the province really only has a jurisdiction over the shore-based elements of this?
Jake, that's a really excellent point, because this is a story about jurisdictional control. So the jurisdiction of the province actually begins at the wharf. Once the product is handed from the harvester to the shoreside sector, whether it be an exporter, a processor, or any number of components in the value chain. The other side of this, which is actually that the harvester standpoint, is regulated by DFO. We've also been asking DFO to step up their measures on this, because at the end of the day, it takes a seller of of a product demanding it to be unreported for it to actually enter into the value chain. And I think that's where we actually have to see an increase in some efforts on the part of the department to make sure that that opportunity is also stemmed as well. We're doing what we can from the wharf on up to make sure it doesn't enter into the value chain. But at the same time, we need the Department of Fisheries, Oceans, and stand up to say, okay, we have to make sure that every landing that comes in is reported, is regulated, and that'll ensure the safety of the entire logistics chain.
Now, the province said the new unit will include 4 inspectors responsible for monitoring, inspecting, and investigating regulatory compliance and acting on offenses. Is 4 inspectors enough considering the amount of illegal activity that's going on?
Well, when it comes to trying to figure out how much illegal activity is going on, you really don't know because it's an illegal activity. So I do think that when we're talking about 4 inspectors, it's going to be a good start. With 4 inspectors dedicated to enforcing just the coastal or the Fishery and Coastal Resources Act, that means boots on the ground from Meat Cove all the way down to Digby. That means it'll actually be able to get a fairly good handle on what the extent of the issue is. And then they can actually decide whether we need to see an expansion of those enforcement efforts or maybe even a slacking off of enforcement efforts. At this point, we just don't know. There have been some notional numbers thrown around, 10%, 15%. But really, until we begin to get our fingers actually into the problem, we're not going to know.
Now, when you were quoted in the announcement that was made by the provincial government, you said having a focus unit is key. Why do you feel that way? Is it because you're giving them basically set parameters within to operate and they kind of know this is their job and this is what they can focus on?
Well, it really comes down to the scope of responsibilities that an enforcement officer may have. When these officers were nestled within a Department of Natural Resources, they were delivering on an incredibly broad array of legislation. So if you think about what your DNR officers are doing out there, they're checking deer tags, they're checking water crossings, they're checking trap lines, they're tracking road allowances and things of that nature. To ask them to also be able to be fully knowledgeable about the Fishery and Coastal Resources Act and the regulations governing aquaculture, fish buying and processing, rockweed leases, and everything under the sun is a pretty tall ask, especially when we're talking about things that require. You'll also see in the audit that, or in the announcement that they're bringing forward a forensic auditor. And really what that means is you're getting a crack team that's focused on the regulations that they are being able to deliver on and support. And at the same time, they'll have the understanding about how to interpret the information that's coming in from the reports from the buying and processing sector to make sure that everything aligns all the way down that chain, all the way back down to the harvester. So this is about building capacity in the right areas and making sure that they also have the time able to actually do these types of investigations, which can be a little bit more robust and a little bit more rigorous than some of the other charges that they might historically have been pursuing.
Now, the compliance unit will work with federal and provincial enforcement services, including Department of Natural Resources, as you mentioned, conservation officers with the DNR. And the province said that enforcement actions could include fines, license suspension, loss of license, and formal charges. Will the provincial inspectors be working in a support role with DFO officers in the RCMP? Is that your understanding?
Well, we really don't know yet. Once again, DFO enforcement has its own little scope of responsibility that kind of begins at the wharf. There is a little bit of overlap there with some licensing pieces. So really what we're hoping to see is that you have this new compliance unit. We're working hand in hand with DFO Conservation Protection, hand in hand with the RCMP. So we envision these not to necessarily be a support role, but more of a collaborative and cooperative role so that each one of the pieces of the puzzle can be pulled in and then they can get the right answer.
The province is also setting up a new audit program and developing stronger summary offense tickets with penalties to match the seriousness of the activity. They said options include suspending and or terminating a fish buyer and or processing license. How will this audit program work?
Well, we're still trying to understand ourselves how the audit program is going to work. What we do know is that within the last 12 months, we've had our reporting requirements to the province. Let's just say they've been amped up a bit, which is a good thing. allows for better information understanding and how support services can be offered. But really, the second piece of that is once the province has those records, they can begin to go through them to make sure that they're right. And really, for good decision making to be made by the province, they really do need that good information in front of them. So really, at the end of the day, what the forensic audit team is going to be able to do is to be able to take the records that come in and cooperatively work with CNP, cooperatively work with the RCMP to make sure that all the records actually do make sense. Where there are gaps or where there are some questions, they can then be asked of the license holders themselves. What's very important to mention is when we look at the summary offense tickets, we've been asking the provincial governments for quite some time to make sure that the enforcement risk echoes actually the offense that's being done. And the reason I say this is historically, if you look at summary offense tickets, they've been in the range of $500 to $1,000, which is not a very significant penalty given some of the activities that we've been seeing. Increasing those summary offense tickets actually mean there's going to be a bit of a heavier bite when an infraction is determined, and will hopefully act as a deterrent to this type of activity moving forward, because it's actually a serious risk to somebody's operations. When it comes to license suspensions or license terminations, those will be context specific, I suspect, related to what is the degree of infraction. Is this a repeated problem that's happening? Is this a reputational risk? But that's all the pieces that are going to have to be determined by the minister and the staff within the Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture. But generally, all good news that says we're strengthening the enforcement regime. We're going to try and improve compliance. And at the end of the day, we should be in a system that's a bit more robust with a higher level of confidence for the end consumer.
Nat Richard, Executive Director of the Lobster Processors Association, said that while most harvesters and buyers play by the rules, it has become clear in recent years that much more needs to be done to effectively deter and root out illegal or unreported transactions from the industry. Now, according to the province, up to 30% of annual lobster landings in Atlantic Canada go unreported, representing up to $400 million in unrealized taxable income for Nova Scotia. So there are some numbers to kind of give an idea, but how bad is the problem from your perspective?
You know, again, that's a great question. I've heard estimates put through the FOPO committee, the Standing Committee on Fisheries, that were between 10 and 30%. I've heard the same sort of numbers tossed around, whether it be you're talking in the Wharf in Southwest Nova or up in Cape Breton. So really, it's clear there is a range of possibilities, but the numbers themselves are really quite substantial, especially if you think about in terms of impacts. We export out of this province about $1.3 billion a year worth of lobster exports. If the decision is made on the part of a consumer that, you know, we're getting a bit questionable and we lose even 10% of that value, that's about $130 million just lost revenue. And it's not just to the province, it's to the communities, it's to the harvesters, and it's to the shore-based sector. That's why we need to get a hold on this, to understand A, the extent of it, and B, make sure that the revenues that we are potentially losing are not lost and they're actually kept within the province here. That's at the end of the day what this is all about, is maximizing the value and the prosperity from the resource.
Well, thank you very much again, Kris. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to speak with me.
No problem, Jake. I appreciate the time.